So today, as you know, this session is just a conversational roundtable. There aren't any presentations. And we're going to move from our lunchtime setting of the back rooms of Congress out into the rest of the nation. And into the many other places where key decisions about education and training for low-income adults get made. So whether those are state legislatures or governor's offices, local employment and training organizations, community colleges, state agencies, those critical decisions get made in a lot of different ways every day by a lot of different kinds of people. So our panel today is going to share some of their experiences in trying to shape those decisions and to use research to do that. We have with us leaders in the education and training field from 2 state community college systems, from an innovative community-based organization that does employment and training, and from a national foundation. And they're going to share their insights about what types of research they find most useful, about what they're hoping to learn from research they engage in themselves, about the lessons they've learned, about effective ways to use research to shape policy and practice. And we're going to focus in part on career pathways, which is a particular strategy for improving education and training for adults that's gained a lot of momentum through such initiatives as the Administration on Children and Families Health Professions Opportunity Grants Program, the Pathways for Advancing Careers in Education demonstration, and other projects. And it's also a central feature of the new Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. So with that, I'm going to turn to our panelists and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll start the discussion.
Hi guys, my name is Josh McGhee. I'm with the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. Evidence kind of cuts across all of our issue areas. We work on criminal justice, on education, on research integrity, and then my area is public accountability. We are deeply invested in increasing the supply, demand, and infrastructure to use evidence in the public sector.
Hi there. My name is Ricardo Estrada. I'm from Chicago. I work for Instituto del Progreso Latino, which is probably one of the largest community-based organizations in Chicago. Very well known around the country in workforce development and career bridges and pathways. We are one of those agencies that are out of the box thinkers. We come out with a lot of models that have been benefiting the community, and because of that, those models has been subject to research. So I will talk a little bit more about those programs later on.
I'm David Prince. I'm the research director for the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges. I think our system has been well known nationally for a number of move forward in terms of looking at our students and looking at our system, and much of that has been based upon the fact that since our beginning we've had access to student unit record data that we've been able to connect to other systems.
Good afternoon. I'm Shauna King-Sims, and I'm with the Kentucky Community and Technical College System. I've worked with policy and program targeting both economically and educationally at-risk populations for well over 30 years now, from a variety of perspectives and state agencies, including adult basic education and GED programming, the workforce development arena back in the old JTPA days, and most recently, and I've come through our state human services agency, spent a couple of years with them just prior to coming to the community and technical college system. I'm in the chancellor's office, and my title these days is Director of College and Career Transitions.
We're going to start with Josh and Shauna, and the question I have for you two is, what kinds of data and research, whether it's your own internal data or outside research, do you find most useful for understanding what's working for whom and how to improve outcomes?
Starting with me?
Yep.
Fantastic. So this is kind of a little bit of a strange question for me, primarily because the foundation that I work for is not really focused on programs, and we kind of our big focus is trying to get more data and evidence into the everyday practice of nonprofits and government. And so the question itself, I'm kind of interested in the answers to those things as well. So if you look at what we do and what we invest in, we're very interested in increasing the demand for evidence at government and nonprofits. We've got investments in Results for America and a few other organizations that tries to increase the demand for evidence. So government saying, hey, I want this evidence. We also invest in increasing the supply, and there it's investing in individual research projects in areas that may be oft overlooked, and I think this is one area that probably could do for more research supply, more evidence supply, and that's super interesting. We also invest in the infrastructure. So this is ongoing data and analytic capacity to help government experiment more and study what works and for whom, and do that on an ongoing basis for continuous improvement. That's really where my focus is. So we've invested in creating that analytic capacity through education research partnerships in New Orleans and Houston and Dallas. Investing in Jeff Liebman's government performance lab at HKS that provides kind of SWAT team assistance to its analytic capacity that can go into government and try to solve problems. We've invested in Brown University in a data lab there that will help the new governor better understand what programs are working and lower the cost of future evaluations. So my answer is really a non-answer and more of I'm very interested in the answers to those things, and we're pursuing them kind of doggedly.
Thank you. So I am sorry to say that I think most of us on the ground are not poring over the academic journals looking for that kind of evidence and research, with possible exception of my colleague David Prince. But for example, I guess I can best describe my approach that served me well is kind of the ready, fire, aim approach to policy and programming. So I am a member of a number of listservs and distribution lists, and I do spend a fair amount of time reading things that come through those venues to me, the short, brief excerpts, and then I always appreciate, I was in the previous session, I do always appreciate a link to the actual paper, and when it's things that catch my attention and when it's problems that I'm dealing with every day, I use the links and I read some of the research. And we use that then to develop kind of an informed policy or an informed program, and we run with it. Then we begin to generate some of our own numbers and data to compare with what we've been reading about on the distribution list and listservs and what's going on nationally, and can then tweak it as necessary to try to do the best job we can for the clients we're serving. So a good example of this that I've worked with for the past 16 years is a collaboration that the Kentucky Community Technical College System has with our state TANF agency. And we've discovered that we're probably doing the right thing, all but for the wrong reason, perhaps initially, in that our state TANF agency, well, let me back up and say that, everyone in Kentucky 16 years ago, we were looking at the data and the evidence and the research that made a clear case for, yes, education and poverty. There was a clear and strong relationship there, and given the fact that Kentucky is ranks so low on all of the education scales and poverty scales, we made that connection at the state level. And we happened to have a governor at that time, several administrations ago, who recognized then education as an economic development strategy, and his administration's logo was Education Pays. So the planets aligned, and there was some good evidence mounting out there. That was about the same time that MDRC released their evaluation of the old Job Opportunities and Basic Skills program. And that told us that there is no one single best solution for working with families in poverty, that shoving them into low-wage jobs was no more of an answer than having them languish for years in adult basic education. So at that point, with our state agency, we put together what we call the Ready to Work program. That is an integrated education. We enroll them in community and technical college programs, some really intensive, intrusive case management that's education focused but participation rate driven for the TANF agency, and then use a large chunk of that funding to fund what we called work studies, because that's what we know in the education arena. And we discovered that, so the state TANF agency then, several years into this, contracted with the University of Louisville to do a statewide evaluation of the TANF programming and all of the various components. Fortunate for us, they identified the fact that these clients engaged in this kind of multiple integrated programming that we were delivering through Ready to Work were, when they did a UI match, had better employment and wage outcomes than any other TANF clients in any other services in our state. So that's what has kept us going for these last 16 years. Our state TANF agency really embraces this approach because we have designed it so that we can use that work study component to make sure these clients meet their federally mandated work participation rates. So it's a win-win-win for all of us. Now, more recently, as we've begun to, we have tracked these clients for 16 years now. For the TANF agency, we've tracked semester by semester retention rates and grade point averages, and the retention rates have been consistently stronger for these students than any of the rest of our students, and the grade point averages have been competitive. It has taken me 16 years to get a completion cohort study. I just got some data back on that within the last couple of months. And I am pleased to say, because in community and technical colleges, those shops are often very under-resourced and overworked and overburdened, but we have invested recently in that department, and those folks have generated a 3-year cohort study for 3 different cohorts of this population, and now we know that, and we used our Pell students as a proxy. So we know that they have, our Ready to Work students have 7% higher success rates. That's basically retention, that they're 10% more likely to graduate than the rest of our Pell students. And then we did a UI, and when they graduate, they're 17% more likely to complete with an associate degree than a low-level certificate, which in my personal opinion is all good. And then we did a UI wage match, and their employment and wages are holding their own with our other Pell students. So we've very recently learned that. Now, throughout these 16 years, again, I pay attention. I read the short version of the studies and the literature and the research, and in order to keep this initiative relevant, we've really beefed up our career coaching strategies in this case management model. Most recently, I've integrated a financial education and credit coaching component, because the studies are telling me that that's important, and we know from our student loan default rates that's incredibly important. So that's kind of a new piece. Most recently, this whole concept of some of the brain research coming out of, I think, perhaps Harvard, that's beginning to tell us that poverty and other related trauma can be affecting these folks' executive functioning skills. We've been sitting around for years wondering why they continue to make one bad choice after the other. And this gives us some hope that perhaps there's a reason for that. And so now I'm looking for professional development for these folks at our colleges in that arena, that they can do a better job coaching these folks around this kind of executive functioning skills model to help improve their choices and the decisions that they're making and to improve our case management.
Okay, let's talk for a moment about career pathways, because a number of you have been involved in career pathways work. And career pathways, for those of you in the audience who don't know, is basically a framework for improving education and training for low-income adults and also for youth by connecting up sort of the education and employment pieces of the picture. So I'm going to ask Ricardo first, and then Shauna to just share insights on why do you think Career Pathways has gained such momentum in recent years? What were the problems that it's trying to solve, and how has that evolution toward pathways or toward other kinds of cross-system partnerships played out in your own experience?
Yeah, thank you. Career Pathways had a tremendous impact in the adult education and workforce development field. But to understand a little better why, we had to see what happened before. What happened 25 years ago when people start kind of combining the basic skill like teaching English within the context of a sector or technical material. So that's how the bridges started. But I want to speak especially about the community that we serve, which is the Latino community in Chicago. So we are about 700,000 Latinos living in the city of Chicago, and mostly immigrants, first generation. For those people who are in this with these characteristics, if they wanted to go to college, especially they are not coming to with the higher education credentials, they need to learn the language. For them to learn the language, at that moment, it was expected that the adult person and the young adults advance one grade level per year. So can you imagine one person coming at 40 years old and place at level 4? So that person needs to spend 4 years learning the language to get to level 12, and then they will be introduced to either a degree in a college or to a vocational program. And for an immigrant, a lot of things happened in 4 years. So that was the situation that was happening in 25 years ago. So the idea and the reason why the career bridges and pathways started by combining these basic skills and technical skills was as to accelerate the learning of the adult. We were losing a lot of people. There were not representation in the sector. Employers were workers, and we had a bunch of people over there, 700,000 in just one community, who did not have the skills to work and to cover this demand. So a lot of organizations around the country, and I do remember especially us in Chicago, 1997, we started with the first bridge in manufacturing. We had a Ford manufacturing who was moving to Chicago, and they wanted to increase the number of workers, especially the bilingual workers, and our community was not ready to that. So we need to accelerate the learning so we can supply those workers to the Ford company. So we start mixing combining the basic skill with the language, with language and math, with very good results. And there was not a specific technique, but we know that worked. At the same time, in Portland, Oregon, Portland Community College was doing the same thing. They were creating bridges over there to advance, but the problem that they had over there was different than the problem that we were dealing in Chicago with the immigrant community. What happened in Portland community colleges is that, and this is still happening, but less now thanks to the career pathways, is the remediation. All 40%, 40 to 60% of the freshman class were placing a list in a remediation class. And they spent 2 years getting out of the remediation so they can get some credit. So people, see, if students wanted to have an associate degree, they will not do it in 2 years. The average were 4 or 5 years because of the remediation plan. So they come out with this, they wanted to find a technique that accelerate the learning of the basic skills so they can move out of remediation. So that's how the movement of career pathways started. Those programs at that time were known as best practices. And I do remember, again, about 15 years ago, that we were presenting our models and in conferences, and people wanted to come to us, but the only thing that we knew at that moment was, hey, combining the two increase the retention, the students learn faster, and at the same time they can earn some credentials that are needed and doesn't need any high school level, so they can enter the field. Like, nurses, you wanted to have a certified nurse assistant that doesn't require a high school diploma, but if you are at a level 9 in Chicago, grade level 9, you can go and pass the exam, and then you continue with the pathway. So we presented a very good alternative to the adults and especially we map out where they can go with this. But it was thanks to research, and that's when researchers start getting interested. Researchers start getting interested in starting the movement or accelerate the learning of the students and the career pathways. And everybody around the country was doing something different. I do remember that people called careers bridges, or people called career ladders to the same thing. Career pathways was used to meaning career bridges, so there was a big confusion. And it was, those models were known as best practices. So wherever we go to a conference that we're announcing a best practice, we wanted to go over there because we wanted to see what's going on. But one research came, and they start better defining what were the elements of the career pathway. So they define what is a bridge. They define what is a career ladder. They define what contextualization is. They define what are the assessments that is to be used depending on the field. So it become the model that we have now. And the outcomes is that now people have been writing a lot. The research has been published of those basic elements of career pathways, and it's becoming so effective now that are replicated around the country. You can see the WIOA, the new WIOA, it mentioned career pathways 26 times in the act. So that's how important it is career way, because research has shown that it is a solution for the low skilled adult to advance faster. In our programs, we guarantee our students that they will go into learn advance the basic skill 2 levels per semester versus traditionally there was 1 level per year. So our students in Chicago, we guarantee, using the methodology that we use and the career pathways, they advance 2 per semester. So they only need a couple of years to move from level 6 to level 10 and get into the university. So that's the response of the of career pathways in terms of our community.
So Shauna, I'm going to circle back to you in a moment, but in the interest of time, I just want to switch to another question for a second. So Ricardo, both you and Josh are involved in National Career Pathways projects, National Career Pathways research projects right now. And I'm wondering if you can just say a word about why you chose to participate in that research, in your case as a funder, in your case as a research site, and what you're hoping to learn from it, and how you plan to use the findings.
So our interest in it is not in a particular kind of career pathways approach. It is simply in generating knowledge and in trying to do rigorous research on important areas of public policy that can build on past research and find ways to incorporate the knowledge that is generated from that into the decision making of government. And this is one area where the public sector is very interested to learn what works, is invested in trying to learn what works, has pursued a research agenda over time, and so that's what makes it attractive to us. And it's also an area of public policy where the upside seems to be quite high, where we think that a small investment can really move the field forward pretty quickly, and can advance it. And because government is invested in it and has kind of mechanisms to incorporate that into decision making, we think that it could scale pretty quickly. So that's our primary interest in this, not in a particular kind of program, but really in the potential to generate real knowledge through rigorous evaluation, through continuous improvement of programs.
So, as I say, career pathways help the adults, and we actually were interested in bringing these models that we created and that we developed to research for two main reasons. One is a mission reason. We want our students to have the best and the most effective model so they can advance and have a livable wage and do a career. So we find out that through this it was happening. But the second reason was mostly sustainability. We know that the government and the public funders and the private funder have been very careful in investing their dollars. And we know that we had to prove that those models that we developed were effective and that were serving the community the way that we say that they would serve the community. We collected a lot of internal data, but they still question that internal data. Is that true what's happening? So it was thanks to the research that's why the Department of Labor, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education are now incorporating in their and using the pathways and the combinations like for instance, we had a model that we created in terms of community colleges and community-based organizations, how they work together and how they should work together. That was a problem before. Now, after the research that we have with the Aspen Institute, so we can see clearly in the Department of Education actually sending RFPs that require that there will be a partner between community colleges and community-based organizations. So that will work better. So again, the mission was very important to us because we believe that the model was, and we are advancing our community. But I think the important reason is that the funders, we need to have an evidence-based model that the funders will believe in there and that they will be comfortable investing their money.
So I want to turn for a moment from thinking about how, in the case of Instituto, you are, developing, testing, and then trying to replicate a particular model, or in the case of Kentucky and Ready to Work, similarly developed a particular model that, you then implemented statewide, to a different kind of use of research, which is really when you don't have control, ultimately, over how resources get directed locally by individual community college leaders, but you're in the system office and you do have sort of access to data, you have access to a pulpit, as it were, for sharing that data, and how do you use research, either your own or outside research, to kind of nudge an entire system of community colleges toward more effective practice? And I'm going to ask David to start, and then you can pass it to Shauna. And Shauna, if you want to work in some of your career pathways, answer into this one too. That'd be great. Thanks.
So I'm with the Washington State system. That's 34 community and technical colleges. I'm with the state office, the state board. We receive the allocation for those colleges. There are no local funding sources for colleges in our system. But each of those colleges is responsible for hiring their own president, having their own independent board as well. So it's a federated system in essence. So our two biggest policy levers at the state level are, one, the allocation, and two, the data. We have the system-wide data and the college's data, and we convert that into a data warehouse. And we have, since 1996, linked that to UI wage records. We've also linked it to all public four-year institutions on a student unit record transcript level basis to follow who's going on. And of course, we use the National Clearinghouse as well. And now we're beginning to have unit record data from high school students coming to us as well. We also have, it hasn't been mentioned today, but all of the SLED systems and the longitudinal systems of the government, federal government has supported. Our state participates in that. And so for the past 4 or 5 years, through the Office of Financial Management, they're building that capacity too. And so now it's actually more broadly available. But access to data has been very important for one, informing and vision, and that's, I think, been our main basis of getting ourselves heard and being meaningful to the colleges and to policymakers is the vision we've created and the fact that everything we do is basically built along that vision and that story that comes from that vision. So that vision really began about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, with a Ford Foundation funded project called Bridges to Opportunity, where we basically took a look at our students who are 25 or older. Most of our students are older, and that's a big part of the story for people to understand, and particularly policymakers who oftentimes went to four-year institutions and don't really understand the population and the differences in the population. In a community college and a four-year institution, they look at it through their own eyes. But we looked at people who were 25 years or older, had a high school education or less, and we said, how far do they get in our system in 5 years in terms of educational attainment, and what are they earning the year after? And from that, we established what we called the tipping point, which basically said you had to have at least a year's worth of college-level education, and then some kind of a credential after that, and that's when you got your maximum gain. We worked with the Columbia Community College Research Center on this. They've been a partner in a number of things with us. And that established a vision that fed into a system direction which said we wanted to raise the level of Washingtonians, and we wanted to know what a floor was for that. That was a floor that we were looking for. Another interesting aspect of creating our vision is that community colleges, students come into those colleges through all sorts of doors for all sorts of purposes. But if you look at your goal as raising educational attainment, then it doesn't matter what door they come through. It matters what are they bringing with them. And then how do you direct them in some kind of focus where they can raise that attainment, where they may not even have known there was an opportunity, or they may not have thought of themselves as a possibility for that. It all feeds into this career pathways type of a vision. So we looked at that, and we created a system direction on that, and we moved forward on moving all students forward. That means we're not just looking at your traditional IPEDS reported student or the information that's reported in IPEDS, because not every student that comes to us is a Title IV student. So there are all sorts of implications about that. We moved from there and we created, we've also done our work in establishing pathways. We initiated or launched what are called the iBest programs, which integrate basic skills and college-level instruction along career paths, and that was one way of getting things started. We've now extended all the way to applied bachelor's degrees. So we're really looking at a system where no credential is terminal. Every student has an opportunity to move forward. That creates a lot of implications, because it basically means that when you're particularly working with students at the lowest levels, you can't be just focusing on the immediate job goal or employment goal they have, but you actually have to start figuring out how you increase their educational attainment so they have some opportunity beyond that, so that you're not creating a false promise about, well, if you do this and then you come back, because we know from our data that students don't come back. Really, once you launch them, they're well gone unless you've really established a very firm launching point. We used our data to inform these IBEST programs, and then most importantly, after that, we went beyond that, and we used our data and information to create a common language within our system to talk about our students, and it's in our performance funding system. So we introduced the concept of intermediate milestones instead of just looking at completion points for students, but what significant points along the way do they reach, that if they reach those, there's more likelihood they're going to go to the next point. And what that did was it created a language for all of our colleges and for legislators as well to talk about and look at what kinds of expectations we could have from our programs. That was very important because, as we've said before, lots of programs fail if you just go right to the end and say, did they make it? So how do you look at, was there anything in there that was progressing students? Our achievement system allows us to capture those intermediate milestones. I think what we've been really successful at is describing this narrative and not talking about a particular kind of student, not talking about the new and fall college student, not even talking specifically about the basic skills student, but talking about Washingtonians as a whole, and then looking at how we're moving them along. It's made our system very introspective, I think. We've done a number of other things along the lines. One of the biggest challenges in working with low-income students, particularly if you're not just going to focus on Title IV, but you can look at your entire population, is to answer the question, who's low income? Because we don't collect that information, everybody. So we take every student's address, we map them into the census. And at minimum, we say they're like the neighborhood that they live in. So we have a way of looking at our entire student body. That's really illuminated a lot of things for our colleges in terms of looking at who they're serving and who's benefiting and who's benefiting from what. Because it's not just a matter of access, it's access to what that's important in our system. And so that's the underlying things that we're trying to use our data and our information to explain.
Thank you. So Kentucky's community and technical college is organized very much like what David just described in Washington State. I think one of the perhaps more interesting things that our Office of Research and Policy Analysis has recently begun to do for our institutions along these lines is, given the ongoing and increasing expectations for institutions like ours to pay attention to and justify program offerings for regional accreditors, for legislators and governors, for state higher ed governing authorities, for workforce development agencies, all with this new and improved access to real-time labor market data analysis and tools. So there's a lot of pressure for us to pay attention to what the pipeline of our students and where they're going to work. We also arranged for a UI match for all of our graduates, completers. So our Office of Policy and Research has developed this kind of pipeline analysis model and process using our internal enrollment and completion data, overlaying the UI employment and wage data, and then laying the labor market analysis on top of that, and has developed kind of a dashboard tool recently for our college leadership and our presidents and they're right now just kind of in the education stage of educating college leadership about this new tool and getting them to think about ways to use that. Hoping that they'll use that tool to consider where they're investing instructional resources, what programs they continue to support as the budgets tighten, where there are opportunities for long-range strategies to redirect resources, and we all know that's easier said than done in the education arena. And to think about not only where their graduates can find jobs, but which of those jobs are really worth finding in the long run. And so we're doing a lot of relatively new work, Christina Whitfield and her shop in that arena. Another area that we're just ravenous and reading all of the literature and the studies is in the area of assessment and placement and developmental education. And the Community College Research Center has been cranking out a lot of good work in that arena. Our faculty have known for years that students were being misplaced using our traditional assessment and placement tools, so they have just been creating their homegrown testing and screening processes. Some years back, we actually engaged with ACT to do a study to match our students' grades in those developmental and gateway courses with their Compass scores to take a look at, is our placement table, are our cutoff scores what they need to be? And that evidence came back, but the faculty pretty much summarily dismissed that and suggested that was more an effect of inconsistent grading policies than it was their placement table, although they had all designed their homegrown instruments to further refine it. But having said that, so now this new work, this national work, that's really kind of shining a harsh spotlight on assessment and placement and lack of progress through the traditional sequence of developmental education programming is really beginning to give us cover to start to mine our own data. That's not terribly encouraging, but we still need to do that. So it's making it safer for us to start to take a hard look at our data, communicate it to our colleges, to our presidents, to our leadership, and to start to try to benchmark where we are. And that's some pretty strong evidence then we lay out there for faculty that, we just must do a better job, and we need to pay attention to evidence for strategies that might help us do a better job. Problem is, we're not finding a lot of really strong evidence for any particular strategies out there, and we are very much open for suggestions.
Thanks. Sounds like a classic case of needing external research to validate what you kind of already knew from your own internal research, but sometimes it helps to have that outside voice. So I want to turn for a minute to David and Josh, and you both lead development of research agendas for your organizations, and I'm wondering kind of what lessons you've learned about the most effective ways to use research. In your case, David, you're using it to shape, policy and practice in the state of Washington. Josh, maybe you're using it more to shape conversations or spark new research agendas. But if you could both just speak to that for a moment, and maybe you could talk about the equity report a little bit too. Yeah.
Who do you want to go first?
Why don't you start?
All right. So how many people are researchers in this room? This is a room full of researchers? Yeah. So I think it would be interesting to kind of give you some guidance on things that you could do. There's been a lot of talk about data and how the people at this table use data. But I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot that researchers can do to do a better job of incorporating research into policy. So if we look at what exists right now, I think there's a dearth of analytic capacity inside government agencies. This has been exacerbated by the recession. The first thing that got cut in a lot of places was the analytic capacity. There's been investment in data systems. We've been improving data systems, but the people to actually do the analysis just don't exist. Government agencies, people who work in these agencies would love to do a better job in various areas, but it's really hard inside their current budget constraints to actually make that happen. So I'm an economist, so I'm going to make fun of economists. Often in the academic community, we sit in our offices and wait for good data to exist, and then we go and do stuff with it. Economics right now seems to be pretty focused on finding data for a well-identified, narrowly defined question that may have no real meaning in the world, but by God, we know the result at the end of doing our well-identified observational study. And there's less of the kind of interacting with the real world where the data actually exists, where there is opportunity to do prospective work. And what we found in trying to direct dollars towards that type of work is government and nonprofits really want to engage in that kind of prospective pursuit of outcome measures. So as researchers, I would encourage you, I think one of the best ways to incorporate evidence into policy is instead of having a research agenda and doing one-off ad hoc research projects where you can get information from government and then you try to kind of pitch the results back to them, create a shared research agenda with government. Pursue outcome measures on an ongoing basis. Say, I'm going to be a partner with you over time, and we're going to pursue outcome measures that are meaningful to you. We're going to add value for you, both on kind of the observational evidence before you actually do experiments. We're going to help you experiment, try new things, study what works, and improve over time. I think there's lots of interest on the government side in actually pursuing outcome measures over time, having a shared research agenda, having kind of a shared value proposition with the academic community. I think too often right now that doesn't exist, that they look at research projects as one-offs. They don't see a whole lot of value to them. They have a hard time looking out and figuring out what the research tells them. And there have been some advances in that area in creating research briefs and things that summarize the research well. But I tell you, it's not the same as kind of creating a shared research agenda, working on an ongoing basis to pursue outcome goals.
So I think we try to do a strong effort in telling folks what our findings mean and what the implications are for our students and, again, for Washingtonians. We try to stay very consistently on the vision we have for raising educational attainment and what we're doing and how it's going to move us forward in that direction. One of the things we do is we try to place everything in the context of the state population, not just the denominator isn't our student population always, it's the state population. What are we doing in terms of moving that forward for the system and then for the state as a whole? In terms of where we are, I think, it's the way you shape the policies with research is everybody comes along with you, I think is the way I would say it. We have a very sophisticated set of precedents right now around our performance funding system in particular. We spent a couple years on it. It's been in place since 1996. Since 2006. After 5 or 6 years, we had CCRC looking at it. We looked at it too, but we had a system review team looking at it that consisted of the college presidents leading it. They led the first go-round too in terms of designing it. But they are very sophisticated now in the nuances of what's going on in that system and it's based on points, what's moving those points. So I would say an important part of the policy agenda and making it work is bringing everybody along at the same time so that they can talk about it with you. One of the areas that was just asked that I talk about a little bit is the equity agenda. That's an issue that it's interesting. We've been reporting on it for years, but somehow it's in the news these days. So recently we did a report. It's actually meant to be a report that's done every couple of years. I stopped doing it a couple of years ago. Nobody asked for it. I thought, and I got tired of doing it because it never changed. So I thought, well, if you want to know, just look at the one from 4 years ago. I'm telling you right now, the results are the same. So I thought, well, how do you do that with a different twist now? And so maybe people will pay attention to it because there was more interest in it. And so I went to the outcomes of every of our 3 mission areas. Our colleges are responsible for basic education, so English as a second language, adult basic education. They're responsible for professional technical education. They're responsible for academic transfer education as well. And I looked at each of those 3 mission areas from the point of view of underrepresented populations in the state for educational attainment, and then I also used that socioeconomic indicator that I talked about where people are in the census to just, in 10 slides, talk about each of those 3 missions. In terms of the professional technical, I showed folks how they were basically tracking low-income people into low-income jobs. So you really weren't, they were getting completions, that was going up, but it was low-income jobs. In case of transfer education, it showed how the importance of the associate degree, how critical that was to somebody transferring. We track our students into the 4-year system. We know we're 40% of a bachelor's degree, of every bachelor's degree graduating class, we're 40% of that were transfer students. Who were those transfer students? Is it creating the equity and the movement that you're looking for? Well, not quite. But what it is doing is that you have to have the associate degree to be successful at the other end. If you're leaving earlier, you're probably not going to transfer, and you're also not going to, if you do transfer, you're less likely to earn your bachelor's degree. That's a big eye-opener in our system, because one of the things our colleges always tell us is, hey, we're successful, they just didn't stick around, they transferred, they left, they met their goal. Well, that's really not true, and so we've shown that to folks, and they're now understanding that, oh, we really have to have people earn the associate degree, and particularly the underrepresented groups, particularly people from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. Adult basic education, which is the gateway for many underrepresented populations, is doing the same thing. The pathways programs are basically not working with the most underrepresented populations in terms of educational attainment. So showing this to folks and letting them see it was quite the eye-opener, and has now generated quite a lot of discussion around them. But then, and one of the things that then embeds it in the system, of course, is they want to see their college's data. So that's an important part of all of this, is we look at this as the system level, but it's built up from the college's information. We can give them back their college's data. We do a lot of, well, we provide all of the data back to the colleges. It's their data coming to us. We're just processing it and putting it into these databases that are being used for these analyses, but we provide all of that back to them. All of that sharing is very important in terms of building consensus and moving people forward. So I think the thing that I feel most proud of is that we do have this, I think, common language to talk about issues within our system. And that's a big deal when you've got 34 colleges and 34 local areas. And they all will talk about the issue and their success in the same terms. And that's a big issue, too, in terms of when they're wanting to share information with each other. So I think those are all important to building the agenda and bringing people together to work on these issues.
Okay, I think I'm going to pause there on our questions and let you ask your questions, since we have just a few minutes left here in the session. So any questions out there?
So the first thing was the employment data, and that really came out of worker retraining issues in 1996. And so our state legislature put a lot of money into worker retraining and wanted evidence for it. And so certainly that and the reason why they wanted the evidence and why there was interest was because the money came from employment security, from the insurance trust fund. And so that was a very high stakes place to take the money from. So right away that created a reason for everybody to want to know. And so that's where that came from. Those initial studies are still done by the Upjohn Institute in Kalamazoo. And they actually, in terms of control groups and so forth, they use a propensity design to pull out a comparison group. And those are very high quality studies. So from the four-year side, we initiated it. I don't think they understood what they were giving us, but we initiated it out of an interest to know what happened to our students, when they moved on. We created a database to follow students. It's a unit record database. The 4 years were involved in the initial go-around of that as well. They never wanted to look at it. They just were not interested. But we looked at it and we produced reports from it, and the reports were quite eye-opening, and we developed those reports. Part of the agreement, the data sharing, was we would, work with the 4 years to understand the data and so forth. Now there's more interested in that. We have a different configuration in our overarching educational board, the Student Achievement Council, and so there's probably going to be more looking at that back and forth. But to this day, I'm dumbfounded why they were not interested in it, but they just gave it to us and we're not. In terms of the high schools, the challenge there is, so we used that initially. It came out of there was a legislative requirement several years back to talk about, legislators want to know, why are we paying twice for somebody's education? That's the bottom line. Yes, higher remediation. It's why are we paying twice for something they should have learned? So we were required to report on that every couple of years. In our state, it's quite high. It's 50% of the students need some remediation, 59% need math, and that's actually a low count estimate that's kind of technical definition that meets the requirements of the report. It's actually way higher than that. So that's lots of money. Then, you know, it's really the K-12 system that was getting slammed on this, so they had the interest in knowing more about what's happening with their students, and that drove that. And now with the longitudinal data system, our education research data center is now pulling all of this together. And so it's all linked. There's still problems with the high school data, the transcript, you know, data, that's a couple years away from really being clean, but it is possible still to attach and get some basic information about who the students are. So we have always been interested in this. My unit was basically created by the original director to do applied research. So from our point of view internally, there's always been a push to go out and do this, and we have benefited from it. And you know, over the years, even just having the information, even when it's not a good story, the fact that you have it is impressive to legislators.
Rebecca Maynard, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for all of these presentations. One thing I have it right, you may think I don't have it right.
No, I think that's right on point. I'm just going to repeat the question for the benefit of our filming here. But so I think the question, Rebecca, if I have it right, is how do you create sort of a sense of a data culture where you feel empowered to collect data that may turn out to not paint a very flattering portrait, and yet, you know, in your case, your local program, Ricardo, or in Shauna and David's case, the colleges in the system feel secure that they're not, that data is going to be used to improve things rather than to, say, take funding away or, you know, whatever the case may be, to penalize them or hurt them in some way. I'm going to turn the microphone to Ricardo first, because I think in the Career Pathways field, some of the very first data I ever saw from a program about progression over time was the data you generated, which, you know, might have hurt Instituto.
Yeah, no, very interesting question. The lady from the staff in Congress was talking about how people are afraid of random assignment, and I might feel that's true. When we decided to go to the PACE research, who APT and Associates is doing, we wanted to do it actually with the community college, and they come out with some kind of policy that no, we cannot do random assignments with the community colleges, and that was the thinking also in the community-based organizations. But I think that with the idea always, the mission idea of Instituto to bring the best programs to our community, I think that evidence will going to provide us the tools to sell those programs to our community easily. So the people will going to participate better or enroll better in a program that we can show data and outcomes, and you can see that people are going to be there with good outcomes. And also at the same time, we're going to be fighting what happened in the community also in the past, and it's still happening, but not that as it used to, is to foundations actually taking money from community-based organizations because they were not delivering. So we were not afraid of research because we wanted to demonstrate that's what the evidence base is, what we wanted to show the community, and that we have programs that have good outcomes, and that they were not going to be wasting their time.
So I think we do put our students first, but we also think it's good to stay ahead of the game. and I think that message has been well established and shown in our system, that by looking ahead as to where we want to go as a system, that it's best that we understand first what's holding us back. And performance funding is a really good example of that. We saw that coming several years before the current wave, and we said, and we actually had a system legislated on us. I think you're aware of that, and people didn't like that, but they didn't see it going away either, and so they said, let's. And we were able to say that too, and we had all of the state data and so forth. So let's, as a system, design the kind of performance funding system that we think meets the needs of our students and meets the needs of our institutions before it's designed for us. And actually, that's been a classic case because the four-year institutions in our state have been fighting that ever since, and they're getting it kind of pushed down their throats as to what it will be. And in our case, we've, developed it ourselves and said, this is what we think fits us. So I think part of it in our system is the culture is, and the system has recognized that, if you want to be in control of your fate, then you need to be, then this use of data and information is the critical part of keeping that control and not having things done to you.
Just quickly, again, using the example of this 16-year ready-to-work TANF collaboration, MDRC and a number of other entities have been very eager to do a random control evaluation of this initiative for a very long time. Our state TANF agency will not have it because they are dependent on this program to make sure that their clients meet the federal work requirement rates, and they cannot have those folks deferred into other services where they're not as confident that that's going to happen. And then I'll admit, on the KCTCS side, as I mentioned, it wasn't until very recently that national research has provided enough cover where we're prepared to start looking at and thinking about and talking about things like completion. So that has not happened for several reasons.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but thank you very much for coming, and let's have a hand for our panelists.